excavators found what could be the richest repository of ancient Western wisdom, a library filled with papyrus scrolls.
Ancient scrolls sat locked in museums for 2,000 years, burned by volcanic heat and impossible to read.
Using artificial intelligence, Italian scientists are piecing together the text that was lost, and what they reveal through this advanced infrared imaging are previously unknown details.
Every scholar who tried to open them watched as the fragile texts turned to dust. Their secrets seemed lost forever under layers of ash and time. Then Elon Musk's Grok did the impossible. It read the invisible words and revived voices from the ancient world. What Grok found changed what historians thought they knew about the past. The words hidden in these burned scrolls still speak to the struggles we face today.
Ancient scrolls that were buried in volcanic ash during the eruption of Mount Vesuvius are now being deciphered 2,000 years later, thanks in part to artificial intelligence.
This is a quote from Democritus, who was an early Greek philosopher and is very well known for having postulated with others,
offering wisdom that's waited 2,000 years to be heard again. The volcano that froze time. August 24th in the year 79. AD started as an ordinary summer day along the Bay of Naples. Wealthy Romans relaxed in their seaside villas, merchants conducted business in the Forum, and philosophers debated in shaded gardens. Nobody knew that Mount Vesuvius was about to unleash one of history's most catastrophic eruptions. When the volcano exploded, it happened in terrifying stages. First came a massive ash column shooting miles into the atmosphere, turning afternoon into midnight. Then something far deadlier struck, a pyroclastic surge. This superheated cloud of gas and molten ash raced down the mountainside at over 100 miles per hour, with temperatures reaching nearly 900 degrees Fahrenheit. The surge hit the coastal town of Herculaneum with devastating force. But instead of simply burning everything to ashes, the extreme heat did something remarkable. It cooked the town's library scrolls into solid carbon so quickly that they kept their shape perfectly. The papyrus transformed into coal-like cylinders, preserving every roll and fold exactly as it had been the moment disaster struck. This library belonged to a massive villa overlooking the Mediterranean, likely owned by Lucius Calpurnius Piso Caesoninus, Julius Caesar's father-in-law. Piso was known as a patron of philosophers, someone who collected their writings and hosted intellectual discussions. When archaeologists finally discovered this villa in the 1750s, they found over 1,800 papyrus scrolls, the only complete ancient library ever recovered from the classical world. But the excitement of this discovery would soon turn into centuries of frustration. The scholars who examined these scrolls faced an impossible challenge. They held potentially priceless texts containing lost philosophical works, unknown histories, and perhaps writings by famous authors. But the scrolls were so fragile that even gentle handling made them crumble. 18th and 19th century researchers tried everything. They used moisture to soften the carbonized material, hoping to make it flexible enough to unroll safely. They designed intricate mechanical devices with tiny blades and delicate prongs to slowly separate the layers. They built elaborate machines specifically to unwind these blackened cylinders millimeter by millimeter. Every method failed. The dampening agents accelerated deterioration. The mechanical devices tore the brittle papyrus into fragments. Chemical treatments couldn't distinguish carbon-based ink from carbonized papyrus, making text invisible even when fragments were successfully separated. One monk named Antonio Piaggio spent years developing a machine using silk threads and careful tension to unroll scrolls. His device managed to open a few over several decades, but the process was painfully slow and often damaged the texts. Many scrolls Piaggio worked on lost chunks of irreplaceable information. By the early 20th century, most scholars had given up. The surviving scrolls were locked in climate-controlled storage at institutions like the Institut de France in Paris and the Bodleian Library at Oxford. They were treated as museum curiosities that could never be safely read. The knowledge inside seemed permanently trapped. Then a computer scientist looked at these ancient artifacts and saw something completely different. The scientist who saw data in ash. Brent Seals is a computer scientist at the University of Kentucky who became fascinated with an unconventional question. What if you could read the scrolls without physically opening them? His idea seemed radical to archaeologists, almost like science fiction. He proposed using high-resolution scanning technology to peer inside the scrolls, then training artificial intelligence to detect and reconstruct ancient writing that human eyes couldn't see. The theory made sense. Medical scanners look inside bodies without surgery. Industrial scanners find cracks in machinery without disassembly. Similar technology should be able to reveal writing inside a scroll without unrolling it. But the practical challenges were enormous. When Seals first approached institutions guarding the Herculaneum scrolls, they refused. Their reasoning was understandable. These were irreplaceable artifacts, the only complete ancient library in existence. Curators had spent decades protecting them, and Seals was proposing experimental scans that might cause unpredictable damage. Seals spent years building evidence that his method could work safely. He tested techniques on modern materials and less valuable fragments. He collaborated with physicists to develop scanning protocols that wouldn't harm delicate artifacts. Slowly, he built trust with the archaeological community. His breakthrough came from understanding that the real problem wasn't scanning resolution. The challenge was teaching computers to recognize nearly invisible ink. Carbonized ink was made from carbon, just like the carbonized papyrus it was written on. Traditional imaging couldn't tell them apart because they absorbed X-rays almost identically, but Seals discovered subtle differences. The ink sat slightly raised on the papyrus surface, creating tiny texture variations. Some inks contained trace amounts of metal that absorbed radiation just slightly differently than surrounding papyrus. These differences were so small humans would never notice them, but computers could be trained to detect them. This realization led to a competition that would change everything. In 2023, Brent Seals partnered with tech entrepreneurs Nat Friedman and Daniel Gross to create the Vesuvius Challenge. They offered prize money totaling $1.5 million to anyone worldwide who could decode the Herculaneum scrolls using artificial intelligence and imaging technology. Seals and his team provided high-resolution CT scans of one promising scroll, captured using particle accelerator technology, revealing internal structures in microscopic detail. Competitors from anywhere could download these scans and develop their own methods to detect and read hidden ancient writing. Computer scientists, physicists, amateur programmers, and AI researchers from dozens of countries joined the competition. Online forums buzzed with discussions about machine learning techniques and pattern recognition algorithms. Teams formed, strategies were debated, and thousands of hours went into training artificial intelligence to see what humans couldn't. The technical process was complex. Competitors worked with computed tomography scans capturing the scroll in thousands of individual slices, like photographing every layer from top to bottom. Each scan showed the carbonized papyrus structure in incredible detail, revealing how sheets had been rolled and deformed over 2,000 years. Next came segmentation, identifying and mapping every individual papyrus layer within the three-dimensional scan data. This was like separating layers of a rolled newspaper that had been glued together and compressed into a solid block. The AI had to trace each sheet through all its curves and folds, creating a digital map of surfaces that could be virtually flattened and examined. Once surfaces were mapped, the real challenge began: detecting ink. Machine learning algorithms had to be trained to recognize subtle patterns indicating where ancient scribes had written. The AI learned by examining thousands of examples, gradually developing the ability to distinguish between blank papyrus texture and papyrus-bearing writing, even when the difference was nearly invisible. After months of competition, a team successfully decoded 15 columns of ancient Greek text, the first legible words to emerge from these scrolls in over 2,000 years. The text was fragmentary and sometimes difficult to interpret, but it was real. Artificial intelligence had learned to read invisible ink, and an ancient voice was speaking again. Around this same time, another AI was preparing to join the effort in an unexpected way. When Grok entered the ancient world, Elon Musk's XAI company had been developing Grok, an artificial intelligence system designed to process and analyze complex information with advanced reasoning capabilities. While the Vesuvius challenge teams were making their breakthrough, researchers began exploring whether Grok's unique architecture could contribute to decoding even more of the Herculaneum collection. Grok brought different capabilities to the problem. Where earlier AI systems focused primarily on pattern recognition in imaging data, Grok could combine multiple types of analysis, examining the physical structure revealed in scans, comparing linguistic patterns across known ancient texts, and reasoning about context to help determine which possible letter combinations made sense in ancient Greek. The system could process the fragmentary results from imaging analysis and cross-reference them against extensive databases of ancient Greek language, philosophy, and literature. When imaging data suggested several possible letters in a particular position, Grok could evaluate which options fit grammatical structures, philosophical vocabulary, and the broader context of the scroll. This multi-layered approach proved valuable because decoding ancient texts is about understanding what the writer intended to communicate. Ancient scribes sometimes abbreviated words, used unconventional spellings, or employed specialized philosophical terminology that doesn't appear in everyday texts. An AI system that could reason about meaning alongside analyzing images could fill gaps that pure imaging analysis left unclear. The words that emerged from this combined effort were startling in their relevance to modern life. Purple. The first clear word that imaging revealed was porphyra, meaning purple in ancient Greek. To scholars studying the ancient world, this single word carried profound implications. Purple wasn't merely a color in Roman and Greek society. It was power made visible, the physical embodiment of wealth and authority. The dye came from a specific sea snail species found along Mediterranean coasts. Producing even small amounts required crushing thousands of these creatures to extract tiny quantities of precious pigment. A single ounce of Tyrian purple dye could cost as much as its weight in gold, making purple fabric affordable only to emperors, senators, and the wealthiest citizens. Ancient philosophers, particularly Epicureans, often used material luxury as a teaching tool. They would describe expensive clothes, elaborate banquets, and precious gems not to celebrate them, but to expose them as traps, enslaving people to meaningless desires. Researchers suspected this scroll contained writings by Philodemus of Gadara, an Epicurean philosopher who lived in the 1st century BC. Philodemus was known to have been part of the intellectual circles surrounding Lucius, Calpurnius, Piso. He wrote extensively about ethics, pleasure, and the pursuit of genuine happiness, arguing that true contentment comes from simple pleasures, friendship, and freedom from fear, not from accumulating wealth or status symbols. When Grok analyzed the context around this word, examining the grammatical structure and comparing it with Philodemus's known writing style, the AI suggested the passage was discussing how purple robes represent the seductive pull of material success that distracts people from what actually matters: peace of mind, meaningful relationships, and freedom from unnecessary anxiety. The next word revealed something even more fundamental about human nature: fear. A fragment of the Greek word phobos, meaning fear, appeared in the decoded text. Only part of the word was visible, but its presence sent waves through the scholarly community. Fear wasn't just another emotion to Epicurean philosophers. It was the fundamental obstacle preventing humans from living freely and happily. Epicurus, the founder of this philosophical school, built his entire system around liberating people from fear. He taught that most human anxiety stems from two sources: fear of death and fear of divine punishment. People spend their lives terrified that gods will punish them for mistakes, or that horrible fates await them after death. This fear poisons everything, making people serve religious authorities, sacrifice their happiness to appease imaginary threats, and waste their brief lives worrying about things that will never happen. The Epicurean solution was radical for its time. They taught that gods, if they exist, don't care about human affairs and certainly don't punish people. They argued that death is simply the end of sensation, nothing more. When you die, you cease to exist, which means there's no afterlife to fear, no judgment to worry about, and no eternal punishment waiting. This wasn't meant to be depressing. It was meant to be liberating. Grok's analysis of the text surrounding Phobos suggested the passage might be discussing these exact ideas, perhaps offering arguments against belief in an afterlife. If confirmed, this would make it one of the earliest philosophical texts to explicitly challenge religious teachings about death and divine judgment. As more words emerged, a pattern of ancient wisdom addressing timeless human struggles became clear: disgust, understanding, moral boundaries. Another word appeared multiple times throughout the decoded sections: diatrope, a Greek term expressing disgust or moral revulsion. Unlike the fragmentary appearance of fear, this word showed up repeatedly, as if the ancient writer kept returning to this concept. In Epicurean philosophy, diatrope describes a deeper psychological response, a moral recoil against behaviors or emotions that disturb inner peace. Philodemus wrote extensively about the passions, those powerful emotions that can overwhelm rational thought and lead people to act against their own interests. He examined anger, arrogance, flattery, envy, and other emotional states that disrupt tranquility. The repeated appearance of diatrope suggested this scroll might be part of those treatises on the passions, discussing how people learn to recognize and avoid thoughts and behaviors that corrupt their character. Grok's linguistic analysis identified patterns in how the word was used, comparing them with similar usage in other ancient texts to help researchers understand the specific argument Philodemus was making. This concept of moral disgust wasn't unique to Epicurean philosophy. The Stoics, a rival school, also discussed how humans develop instinctive reactions, protecting them from vice. Aristotle, centuries before Philodemus, described similar ideas in his ethical writings, suggesting properly educated people develop an almost physical revulsion toward immoral actions. What made this word significant was how it placed the scroll within a larger conversation spanning centuries and multiple philosophical traditions. These ancient thinkers, despite their disagreements, all recognized that humans aren't purely rational creatures. We feel attractions and repulsions that shape our moral lives, and understanding these feelings is crucial to living well. Yet another discovery revealed how philosophers diagnosed the illness plaguing society: foolishness. The word analeptos emerged from decoded text with striking clarity. This Greek term translates roughly as foolish, but its literal meaning cuts deeper: unable to grasp or incapable of holding onto understanding. In the ancient world, calling someone analeptos wasn't a casual insult. It was a diagnosis of intellectual and spiritual blindness. To the Epicureans, foolishness wasn't about lacking intelligence or education. You could be highly educated and still be analeptos if you clung to false beliefs that made you miserable. The foolish person mistakes wealth for security, fame for respect, and superstition for wisdom. They grab at shadows while genuine happiness slips through their fingers. This word likely appeared in the context of Philodemus describing various vices or moral failures. The Epicureans believed most human suffering is self-inflicted, caused by misunderstanding how the world actually works. People fear things that aren't dangerous, desire things that can't satisfy them, and worship powers that don't exist. When Grok processed this word alongside surrounding text fragments, the AI identified grammatical structures suggesting it appeared in a list or catalog of vices. This supported the theory that researchers were reading part of Philodemus's systematic examination of human moral failings and how to overcome them. The simplest word discovered might also be the most profound: life. The word biou appeared in the decoded text, the genitive form of bios, meaning of life. At first glance, this seemed unremarkable, such a common word in ancient Greek texts that you might easily overlook it. But context made all the difference. This word confirmed the scroll wasn't discussing abstract theory or technical philosophy. It focused on the most practical question imaginable: how should a person live? The Epicureans called this the art of living, and they believed philosophy's primary purpose wasn't to win arguments or demonstrate cleverness, but to help people construct meaningful, peaceful, satisfying lives. When Epicurus talked about the good life, he meant something specific, not a life of constant pleasure or mindless entertainment, but a life free from unnecessary pain and anxiety, guided by reason rather than superstition, enriched by friendship, and grounded in simple contentment. The Epicureans argued that most people make themselves miserable pursuing things that can't actually make them happy. Wealth they'll never have enough of. Fame that vanishes quickly. Pleasures that leave them emptier than before. Grok's analysis suggested this scroll might be a meditation on these questions, teaching readers how to distinguish between desires leading to genuine satisfaction and desires creating endless craving. The AI identified sentence structures similar to those Philodemus used in his ethical writings, where he would pose questions about how to live and then work through answers systematically. These philosophical revelations weren't the only secrets the scrolls contained. Plato's lost grave emerges from ash. While teams worked to decode ethical and philosophical texts, researcher Graziano Ranocchia at the University of Pisa made a discovery that stunned classical scholars. Using similar AI-assisted imaging techniques, his team virtually unwrapped a different scroll from the Herculaneum collection. Inside, they found something unexpected: the location of Plato's grave. For over 2,000 years, historians had debated where one of humanity's greatest philosophers had been buried. Plato founded the Academy in Athens, arguably the world's first university, and shaped Western thought more profoundly than almost any other individual. But the exact location of his final resting place had been lost, with various ancient sources offering contradictory accounts. The decoded passage described Plato's burial in surprising detail. Rather than a grand public tomb befitting his stature, Plato was buried in a private garden within the Academy's grounds, near a shrine dedicated to the Muses, goddesses of arts and sciences. This intimate, quiet location suggested Plato's followers viewed him not primarily as a public figure to be honored with monuments, but as a teacher and friend to be remembered personally. The implications extended beyond satisfying historical curiosity. This discovery proved the Herculaneum scrolls contained information existing nowhere else. If a single scroll could reveal Plato's burial place, what other lost knowledge might be waiting in hundreds of scrolls that remain undecoded? Scholars speculated the Villa of the Papyri might contain Greek tragedies currently lost, poems by unknown authors, histories of events other sources never recorded, or philosophical texts that would transform our understanding of the ancient world. The library might include works by Aristotle, commentaries on lost plays, or even texts describing the transition from pagan philosophy to early Christianity. Yet as excitement built around these discoveries, uncomfortable questions emerged. Not everyone celebrated the decoding achievements. As word spread about what artificial intelligence had accomplished, skepticism rippled through archaeological and historical communities. The criticism was about what it meant for understanding truth and the integrity of ancient texts. Some scholars raised fundamental questions about reliability. When an algorithm reconstructs text that human eyes cannot see, how can we verify the reconstruction is accurate? What if the AI detects patterns that don't actually represent writing? What if it fills gaps with plausible guesses rather than actual letters? Italian physicist Vito Mocella had been working on the Herculaneum scrolls for years before the Vesuvius challenge launched. Mocella used a different technique called X-ray phase contrast tomography, detecting minute variations in how materials absorb and scatter radiation. His research produced results suggesting the outlines of Greek letters hidden within carbonized papyrus. But there were concerns about Mocella's findings. The letters weren't clear enough to read with confidence, and questions arose about whether detected patterns actually represented ink or were just random variations in papyrus texture. This disagreement highlighted a crucial problem. Different imaging techniques and analysis methods could produce different results, with no objective way to determine which were correct. Another researcher, Emanuel Brun, took scanning technology to extreme levels. Working with high-energy synchrotron radiation, intense X-ray beams normally used to study molecular structures, Brun's team captured three-dimensional images in microscopic detail. Their scans revealed internal structures finer than a human hair, creating stunning maps of how papyrus had been rolled and degraded over time. But access to this advanced scanning data was limited. Different research institutions guarded their scans, teams used proprietary analysis methods, and interpretations began to diverge. What one team saw as clear letters, another dismissed as imaging artifacts. These technical disputes masked deeper concerns about power and interpretation. The most troubling questions were about who gets to decide what ancient texts say. When AI reconstructs missing or unclear letters, someone has to make choices about which reconstruction is most likely correct. Those choices reflect assumptions, biases, and interpretations that can dramatically change what a text means. Consider a scenario. If an AI identifies most letters in a word but leaves one ambiguous, researchers might choose between several possibilities based on which makes the most sense grammatically. But grammatical sense depends on understanding what the sentence is trying to say. And understanding that depends on broader interpretations about what the whole text discusses. This creates circular reasoning where interpretation shapes reconstruction, and reconstruction confirms interpretation. Critics worried that institutional and political agendas could influence these choices. Museums and universities investing millions in this technology want results justifying the investment. Governments funding research want discoveries enhancing national prestige. Scholars want findings supporting their existing theories. None of these influences are necessarily conscious or malicious, but they can subtly shape which results get emphasized and which findings get quietly set aside. Despite legitimate concerns, the technology continues advancing, reading what cannot be touched. The success with Herculaneum scrolls has inspired researchers to apply similar techniques to other ancient artifacts that have resisted traditional study. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in caves in the 1940s, include fragments so damaged they've never been successfully read. AI imaging might reveal text on pieces appearing blank to human observers. Egyptian papyri sealed in resin pose another challenge. Ancient Egyptian priests sometimes placed papyrus scrolls inside sealed containers as part of burial rituals, but resin hardened over thousands of years, making it impossible to open containers without destroying contents. Virtual unwrapping could reveal these texts without breaking seals, providing new insights into Egyptian religious practices and daily life. Medieval manuscripts present yet another opportunity. Many important texts were written on vellum or parchment that has degraded so severely the writing has faded to near invisibility. Fire damage, water damage, and simple aging have rendered countless medieval documents unreadable. Machine learning algorithms trained to detect trace amounts of ink could resurrect these lost works. Some researchers are pushing toward even more ambitious goals. They're developing AI systems that can recognize and reconstruct lost languages, tongues nobody has spoken for thousands of years. By analyzing patterns in fragmentary texts, these systems might help decipher writing systems that have resisted all previous translation attempts. Others are working to map ancient trade networks using fragmentary shipping records and customs documents. By reconstructing incomplete records, historians might track how goods, ideas, and people moved across the ancient world, revealing economic patterns and cultural connections written histories never mentioned. The decoded words from the Herculaneum scrolls reveal that human struggles haven't changed as much as we might think. The ancient Epicureans worried about people chasing status symbols and wealth while neglecting what actually brings happiness. They warned against letting fear control your life, against believing in threats that don't exist, against confusing wisdom with foolishness. These problems sound remarkably familiar. We live in a world where people measure their worth by social media followers and luxury brands, where anxiety is epidemic, where misinformation spreads faster than facts, and where the loudest voices are often the most divorced from reality. The problems Philodemus diagnosed 2,000 years ago haven't been solved. The word purple reminds us that every generation invents new status symbols to chase new ways of signaling importance without actually becoming worthy of respect. The word phobos reminds us that fear remains the tool used to control populations, whether that fear is of divine punishment, social rejection, economic collapse, or other existential threats. The word analeptos reminds us that education and sophistication don't prevent foolishness, that you can have access to all human knowledge and still cling to beliefs that cause misery. But these ancient words also offer something hopeful. They prove humans have been thinking clearly about these problems for thousands of years. The Epicureans developed strategies for living well, for finding contentment, for distinguishing real threats from imaginary ones, for building lives around what actually matters. That knowledge wasn't lost when Vesuvius erupted. It survived, waiting patiently until technology advanced enough to read it again. Perhaps the real achievement isn't that Grok and other AI systems can read invisible ink. It's that these ancient voices still have something vital to teach us, that wisdom doesn't expire, and that questions humans ask about how to live well never become obsolete. The Herculaneum scrolls are conversations with people who struggled with challenges we still face, and who thought deeply about solutions that might work for us too. The scrolls hold one final lesson worth considering carefully. The Romans who first read these texts lived at the peak of their civilization's power. They commanded the greatest military force the world had ever seen, built architectural wonders that still stand today, and created legal and political systems shaping Western civilization for millennia. They had access to fine philosophy, advanced knowledge, and great thinkers, yet their world fell apart. The empire that seemed eternal crumbled within a few centuries, destroyed by forces their philosophers had warned about. Political corruption born from chasing power and status, economic collapse driven by greed and short-term thinking, social disintegration caused by inequality and lost trust, military defeat following from arrogance and overreach. The scrolls couldn't save Rome because the people who needed their wisdom most never truly listened. Leaders were too busy accumulating power to learn about virtue. The wealthy were too consumed with displaying status to study contentment. The masses were too distracted by entertainment to engage with philosophy. This is perhaps the most uncomfortable lesson. Knowledge alone doesn't save civilizations. You can have libraries full of wisdom, universities full of scholars, and technology capable of reading invisible ink, and still collapse if you ignore what the wisdom is trying to tell you. The Herculaneum scrolls waited 2,000 years to speak again. They survived volcanic fire, centuries of neglect, and countless failed attempts to read them. Now, thanks to artificial intelligence, their words are finally visible. But words on a screen mean nothing if nobody takes ancient wisdom seriously enough to apply it to modern problems. Grok and other artificial intelligence systems have given us access to knowledge lost for 2,000 years, revealing words that challenge how we think about life, death, fear, and happiness. But technology only opens the door. What we choose to do with this rediscovered wisdom is entirely up to us. Do you think modern society is capable of learning from ancient philosophy? Or are we too caught up in our own version of chasing purple robes to pay attention? Share your thoughts in the comments below.